Color correction is an essential part of the post-production process, and I think a really fun part too. It's during color correction that you correct individual shots to achieve the appropriate contrast, color balance, and saturation. It's also where you perform shot-to-shot correction, making sure that all the shots within a scene look like they belong together. And it's also where you can stylize your footage, adding a particular look or style to your scenes. I'm going to go into my 10.1 keyword collection and load my Analyze project, and let's take a look at a couple of shots. Before we look at these, though, let's talk a bit about process. In order to effectively color correct a shot, you need two things to do it right. First, you need your eyes to get a sense of what it is you need to correct. Second, you need a series of video scopes in order to measure the light and color values of your image in order to carry out the adjustments. So in this movie, we're going to take a look at that first part, where we analyze footage with our eyes. We'll first take a look at this shot of Mike, which I actually didn't do anything to. It's the original footage, and it needs some basic color correction. Then we're going to take a look at another shot of Casey, and I purposefully doctored this in order to give us practice correcting something that needs even more help. And then here is a last shot of these guys, and it's also from the original undoctored footage. So let's go back to Mike here, and we have several questions that we need to answer about this image. We need to know what should be black and what should be white. We need to see how the brightness and contrast are. We need to assess if there's a color cast, and we need to judge its general hue and saturation. So let's go through this. First, what part of the image is the brightest part of the image, and is it supposed to be white? Well, the brightest parts of the white columns should be our white value. Right now it's close, but we'll probably need to bump it up a bit. Now, which part of the image is the darkest part, and should it be black? Well, I think the darkest part of the image should be the chairs in the background here and some of the shadows around his face and neck. And yes, some of those areas will register as black. Right now, I think this is the main problem with the image. Our darkest values are far too bright, so everything's looking pretty milky. Next, how are the brightness and contrast? Again, this is a pretty flat image. We'll need to increase the contrast significantly, which means that we'll have to brighten the light parts of the image and then darken the dark parts. Next, how are the colors, and is there a color cast? Well, I don't think there's a huge color cast here, but I think we're going to probably have to warm things up a bit, particularly in his flesh tones. And then finally, how is the saturation level? Well, this image is quite desaturated. We could certainly increase the saturation quite a bit to give the entire image a little more vibrance and more pop. So I think we have a pretty good idea of where we're going with that shot. I'm going to come to this shot here to show you where we're headed, before and after. Let's go to Casey. And again, this shot needs a lot more help. We'll ask ourselves the same basic questions. So first, what part of the image is the brightest part of the image, and is it supposed to be white? Well, the white curtains in the background here should be pretty bright, maybe almost white, and the light shining through the doors on the far left and the far right are even brighter, and those will probably register as the brightest, whitest part of the image. Next, what part of the image is the darkest, and is it supposed to be black? Well, probably just some of the shadows in his shirt and around his neck and face are the darkest parts, and they will need to register at near black. I think they're close right now, but because everything else in the image is so dark, it's not looking right and there's no detail, so we'll need to fix that. Next, how are the brightness and contrast? Well, the entire image is much too dark. We're going to have to brighten the lightest parts of the image quite a bit, and we'll also have to really bring up our midtones since its flesh tones are so muddy. Next, how are the colors, and is there a color cast? Well, there appears to be a pretty severe blue color cast, so we'll need to warm up the image a lot. Finally, how is the saturation level? Well, the saturation is really low, and we'll need to bump that up quite a bit, especially in the midtones, so that his flesh tones start looking nice and healthy. So we know what we need to do, and just for your reference, here's where we're headed. So before and after. And then finally, let's look at this last image, but I'm not going to be so methodical about it. I'll make general observations, which is where you'll get to eventually as you continue color correcting. So this image is fairly flat, it doesn't have enough contrast, and it has a pretty yellow color cast. It also needs greater saturation since all of the colors are pretty muted. Simple enough. And again, here's the before, and this is where we're headed, the after. So again, even before we start looking at any measurements with our video scopes, we already have a pretty good idea of where we want to go in correcting these images. Again, soon you'll get so skilled at this part of the process that you'll just perform the analysis in a matter of seconds as an observation before you dive into your correction.